Hey everybody, it's another off-the-cuff video with the Mattster here, and I'm doing a analysis of a certain year in time that I did live through and have survived to tell this tale about it, to tell a story about it. So, by the way, before I start this video proper, I would like to thank the subscribers. Now I'm at 100 subscribers. Of course, I have a long way to go before I feel like I'm really completely a, whatever you want to call it on YouTube, but it makes me happy that I've finally broken at least 100 subscribers on here. Um, and this is another off-the-cuff video because I'm not scripting this out at all, but whatever. I'm going to start doing more of these videos as well as more of my scripted ones. I'm already starting the sequel to my previous Alex Jones video, not the one about the gay frogs, but the one about me and Alex Jones. So I started scripting that last night. So, anyways, this one basically is because I was going to order this book about, believe it's called Twilight of the Gods. It's like it's not Bathory's one of Bathory's Viking metal albums, and it's not about any kind of Viking thing or anything like that. It's by this author. He's talking about. I'll probably leave a link in the description. He's talking about like kind of how he grew up with rock music, and it's like all the people that were involved with that are becoming an advanced age, and how rock music is dying and all this stuff, and all this kind of his analysis of rock as a idiom and so forth. So I found it interesting to read like a couple pages from this book, some sample pages, and I kind of spurred this video because it made me think about in my own life when things were threatened with regards to music that I liked, and basically how much better things are during specific times. So case in point, the year 1995, if you can imagine this, Iron Maiden's playing a club. They're not playing a stadium, they're not playing a theater, playing a club. You read music they're playing clubs. Okay, I saw them in a club in 1996. I'm just saying they're playing clubs. So Iron Maiden's playing clubs. You read metal magazines, and there's these journalists debating whether or not to basically use a different word for heavy music. And I read a few of these articles in the mid 90s, and it was like, metal is dead. We got to use a different word. So basically, that's what happened. The worst year being 1995. So I would say that 1995 was the year that metal died. It came back. It got revived. And it's still like a zombie walking the earth right now. But metal died in 1995, for real. So Metallica, cut off their hair and started playing sort of loosely 70s influence, sort of alternative influence, groove, hard rock, metal, whatever you want to call it, with even a little country influence in there too. So in a bad way, in my opinion. I never liked Load or Reload that much. So if it was called a different band, I probably would have liked it a little better. You had Bruce Dickinson came out with his Skunk Works album, which is kind of grunge influenced. And I actually like that better to this day, better than Load and Reload. You had, it was a couple years later, but Rob Halford came out with his 2 album. It's called 2. That was the band. Voyeurs. It was industrial rock, metal, whatever. It wasn't really that heavy. I mean, he stopped singing like he did in the 80s. Because by then, singing like that, at least at that point in time in America, was seen as like this terrible throwback to the 80s. Like, you can't sing high. No winky guitar solos. No, it has to be simple and relevant. And the lyrics have to be politically and socially conscious. You can't sing about dragons or, So this is this was the worst year. I was in high school. Was I? You know, I was in high school in 1995. This is giving away my age a little bit. So I don't give a fuck. Whatever. Um, and during this year, people just, during that year, I mean, metal was pretty much dead. I mean, you had, I think the first Korn album had come out, and there was this kid in high school that was, he was into some of those bands like Korn and Machine Head and Fear Factory and Pantera, of course, Propane, God, what else? And we had debates about metal because I was always a defender of melodic melody in metal, and I had already gotten into like Napalm Death and Carcass, so I was like, to me, like groove metal was just, I just didn't, it didn't jive with me as well as like, I mean, if you listen to Napalm Death, From Enslavement to Obliteration, it just literally obliterates groove metal in extremity and uh, just sheer noise compared. I mean, it assassinates groove metal, And I do like groove metal to some extent now, and I did back then, but I just I never really dug like a lot of the groove metal stuff because it was just like kind of repetitive to me. Like Fear Factory, for example, I thought their Demanufacture album was like, just I don't know. There was a lot of bands, and I made this one of my best friends still to this day, who was I made a friend who was really into the industrial scene. He played me stuff that was just like, it made Fear Factory sound soft. I mean, there was this band Seal Wolf that did this album, was industrial metal. It was like, holy shit, and even Godflesh was just well beyond Fear Factory in my opinion, even though it was slower. But anyways, that's a digression for another day. My whole thing with groove metal was it bored me, but the magazines were starting to kind of like steer away from the metal word, and there were articles written about this, and groove metal was no exception. They were starting to want to call it aggro or hard music instead of metal, because metal is seen as like this terrible like throwback to the dated 80s. We're so embarrassed by the hair and that's how it was. And in high school, if you admitted that if you said you liked metal, at least with the school what I went to, you were a hesher, which meant like this trashy, bigoted, ignorant, white trash, Camaro driving, beer chugging loser. To put it lightly. Because they were so much better by being even a crust punk on the street begging for change is still more enlightened by that metalhead hesher, because their bands are more political, which is total bullshit because there's plenty of political metal bands even back then. Or I don't know why they thought this. Or being a raver was more acceptable. You could fucking, ruin your brain with ecstasy and LSD, which is, I don't actually hate those types of drugs. I mean, opioids and cocaine are far, in my opinion, do more harm to society than those drugs. I do, But a lot of those people did every drug, so it didn't really fucking matter. But anyways, and it's not really ruining your brain necessarily unless you do too much, obviously, or ruining your psychology or whatever. Anyways, I'm just going off on a tangent there. So that was the whole thing in the 90s and the mid 90s. People didn't really understand that. I mean, people didn't understand metal. You mentioned Iron Maiden to someone, they thought it was either death metal or hair metal. They didn't understand what metal was. The internet was just in its infancy as far as popularity goes, so people didn't really have the resources to hear these bands or what they really sounded like. And people, are or don't even realize they should be grateful for how things are now with music and availability and stuff. So it was really tough to be the only kid, not the only kid, but one of the only kids that liked metal, and then having to hide it was even worse for me because it was like I didn't want to wear an Iron Maiden shirt to school, even though I did the first 2 years of my high school. But by the third year, I was like, I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna try to pretend that I'm not. I got into gothic rock and industrial and techno and stuff, and I still like a lot of that stuff. I actually, because it was kind of like it did. I did branch out, but being into metal, it was just like you're not only unfashionable, but you were seen as like committing this kind of sin or something like against society because you were into metal. Even if you were a punk rebel into like Dead Kennedys, Misfits, or whatever, The Clash, or whatever the fuck, these old punk bands or whatever, you were still seen as cooler than if you were into Iron Maiden or Judas Priest or Black Sabbath. I remember actually this one girl I went to high school with, she was like, and this is how the mindset was. Black Sabbath, 70s Black Sabbath by then, because of grunge, was cool. But Dio Black Sabbath, it's like, no. She's like, yeah, I have this double tape with Heaven and Hell and Paranoid, and that Heaven and Hell, it's butt rock, or whatever, So having that 80s metal mentality was seen as butt rock or hair metal, even if it wasn't fucking hair metal. I mean, hair metal is a specific genre of glam influenced hard rock or metal that has nothing to do with Dio but any high singing or shred guitar solos were like, well, that's too close to hair metal, so we can't have that. Listen to Fear Factory. They don't have any guitar solos. It just goes over and over again. That's proper metal. I mean, people hated those metal bands too that were into the I mean, it's not politically correct, but political correctness. But it's the musically correct or whatever. People were against metal. So you're a hasher. So that's kind of what happened with metal in regards to the youth culture, and slowly but surely through the 90s and through the 2000s and later, metal became more accepted, and even like people that you would never expect giving me props for wearing an Iron Maiden shirt once in a while. I'm like, what the fuck? It's like back in the 90s, nobody really understood that. I mean, but the first Iron Maiden show I went to in 1996, I mean, it's basically a club. It was at this place called The Rave in Milwaukee. And it's it's a big club, but it's still, it's like, there were people there, but it's like, oh, well, go to this Iron Maiden show. And they played, huge auditoriums in the 80s, and now you're back to the club days, basically, in essence. And every band, these bands got dropped by their labels and stuff, and they had to go to these smaller labels. But the main thing that really bothered me was just the media and young people's perception of metal by then was this passe fad that was never that good to begin with. And here's this other thing that we should listen to that's far better, even if it's, or heavy music that's far better and far more acceptable, because it's more about like, 9 Inch Nails, for example, which I do, actually, I love 9 Inch Nails, but that was like the more acceptable thing to like rather than, new wave or British heavy metal or whatever. It's like, because of hair metal stigma, it painted everything else, and because grunge kind of took over and alternative and all that. So that was kind of what happened, but I can pinpoint the year that metal had its death. even if Rob Halford said metal was dead, I think it was 97, even though he went back to Judas Priest and look at him now, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, there were numerous other, not many other, but numerous other people that pronounced metal as dead. I think Jeff Tate did or something from Queensryche. I mean, they just said, metal's gone, man. It's over. And look at what happened. There was a resurgence, you know, but did metal's death affect me adversely? Well, I'd say for about 1 or 2 years it did, because it was like, yeah, I'm going to listen to these other bands, you know, and this other styles of music and these other trends. And I'm glad I broadened my horizons. I'm glad I branched out, because honestly, that got me into a lot of different stuff, like more progressive rock, even, you know, more psychedelic rock. And, you know, that actually influenced my music later, because I use a lot of keyboards and stuff because of that stuff. But at the time, it was really shitty being this almost closeted metalhead, you know? So, and what happened in 97 was the return for me to metal, because I discovered all these European bands that I'd never heard. And also there was a key moment there where I wasn't as scared of lyrics about the occult, because growing up, I was kind of a Christian in a certain way. So when lyrics were really occult oriented, they kind of freaked me out, and I was like, I don't want to be a Satanist. Yeah. So in 1997, in all honesty, I started, you know, I read the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey, and I was like, oh, this is what this is about. You know, it was like big influence. And then I think I read Lords of Chaos, which is about the black metal movement and all that. I read these books. And Lords of Chaos is kind of a sort of bullshit some of the time, and there's a movie coming out based on it, which is, anyways. But, so yeah, that's what happened with me with metal. I think, even in 97, 98, in the town where I lived, where I grew up in, it was hard to find people into metal. It's like you had to buy these import albums from overseas a lot of the time, like Blind Guardian. The first CD I bought was like $34 from this import company, because you could not get it in the United States. They didn't actually sell any Blind Guardian albums in the U.S. until like 2001 or 2002. I think it was 2002, maybe 2001. Night at the Opera was their first U.S. release for Century Media. You had to buy this shit from overseas, or there were companies that imported stuff. Like there was this place in Milwaukee that had import CDs that I ordered from and stuff, and it was $35 some of the time, or, you know, $25 or whatever. And, you know, it was tough, but, you know, I was the only person on the block that probably had a Blind Guardian shirt at fucking, you know, the town where I was at. I didn't see anybody else ever wear one. And then one day when I was working at my old job at Walgreens, which was downtown, there's this guy that was wearing an Iron Maiden shirt, and I bought it literally from his fucking back. I said, oh, I wanted that shirt, man. That's a vintage one. And I was like, I'll pay you $20. He went and washed it and came back and brought it. I was like, it was rare that you saw Iron Maiden shirts. And by then there was that ironic hipster thing was starting to like sort of creep in, where like, oh, the 80s, I don't really like Iron Maiden, but I just like to wear it to make fun of it. But I kind of like it. You know, shit was starting to get, that was 98 or 99, but it was hard. So I just wanted to put this video together, because I just wanted to tell a story about a certain time in life where, you know, your chips are down as far as what you're into, what your cultural influences are, because nobody likes it. Everybody's making fun of it, and it's shitty. But, you know, you stick through it, and you still like whatever you like. If every metal band broke up or were put in prison or something, some crazy shit, I would still listen to it. I don't give a fuck. I have listened to metal for many years, and I don't really care what society thinks. I don't care if rock is dying, which it sort of is. I mean, Greta Van Fleet is the biggest hope for rock, and they sound exactly like Led Zeppelin. It's like, oh God. I mean, let me give you an example of someone that never got on that level who should have. There's plenty of examples in the independent music scene. Jay Raytard, he had, or I think that's how to pronounce his name. He had all these bands, all these cool bands, including his solo band. It was kind of this really daring, intense punk-derived music, but he never made it as big as Greta Van Fleet, who's the most, plagiarizing band ever as far as sounding like Led Zeppelin. But obviously Led Zeppelin were guilty of that as well, as we all know. But anyways, that's all for this video. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these videos and just, my analysis. And that was kind of a ramble, but the whole summation of that is 1995 was the worst year for metal on record, as far as, I think, probably as far as sales, as far as attendance, as far as everything. That was the death of metal. And slowly but surely, especially 97 through 99 through, whenever, that's when it started to pick up again. And these bands reformed, and, these people said, oh, I don't know why I said that in that interview at Metal Died, like Rob Halford and shit. But anyways, that's it. I'll see you later.